Yeah, you can see Chigudu district and Kadoma district. From the whole here, from the 100% of the cake in Kadoma and Chigudu districts, the white farmers owned about 45% of the land. By the time the invasion started in 2000, we only owned 26% of the land in this area. Countrywide, as white commercial farmers, we only owned 20% of the land. In 1980, we owned 30%, just over 30% of the land in Zimbabwe. By the year 2000, that had decreased to just less than 20% of the land in Zimbabwe. We often get propaganda figures thrown around that as white people we own 70% of the land in Zimbabwe. That's propaganda, and it's amazing that so many people still actually believe it and still quote that figure. But the actual fact of the matter is that only 20% of the land was owned by the white farmer in the year 2000. When the land is developed properly and we have got farmers that really know what they're doing and have got ownership of their land so that they can go to the financial institutions and borrow for their seasonal cropping requirements, we are able to outproduce any other continent on earth.
So what happened to these green areas that were originally handed out to black commercial farmers? Was it?
Most of these actually went to small-scale black farmers, not commercial farmers. Most of them are now sitting in a subsistence state. None of those people were given ownership, and as a result they can be removed at any day. And so they don't actually invest in their land. They haven't been able to go to a bank and say, here are my title deeds, I want to actually put in an irrigation scheme so that I can have a chance of producing for the nation. And as a result, those areas remain totally undeveloped to this day, and those farmers are just subsistence farmers who very often can't even feed themselves. So you ask, what area here is being used productively now? I would say we're probably at about 5% capacity of what we could actually produce if the people were given ownership of their land and farmers were actually put on the land. Professional commercial farmers, doesn't matter whether they're black or white, to actually work that land.
Fall down wasted and I feel I'm going down. Fall down wasted and I feel I'm going down.
We're going to see Ruth Pace. Ruth is in Chigudu here, and she's I think, fourth generation farmer from this district, but at the moment has not been allowed to farm for the last 3 years, although they're still managing to stay on in their house despite many threats. Yeah, her husband's away in England at the moment trying to earn a bit of money just to keep them going.
My great-grandfather was a miner, a gold miner, born in Scotland, and he came out to South Africa initially in the early 1900s, 1901, and they travelled up, well, they moved up to what was then Rhodesia in 1909 to an area called the Ethnothistle area or Ethnothistle mine. And yeah, and they started mining there in the bush, living in their little pole and dugger huts and moving around. They were small workers, moving around from mine to mine. Yeah, and my grandfather grew up in the bush there. He never went to school. In 1940, my grandfather bought his first farms and he started cattle ranching, and he imported his first pedigree Afrikaner cows from South Africa. Yeah, and yeah, commenced farming and mining. He never gave up the mining. He was a miner till the day he died. And yeah, my mother was born on the farm. And of course, myself and my three brothers. My mother was imprisoned after these initial Section 5s were issued, and you were given a certain period of time in which you had to vacate the farm. And we chose to ignore it, along with a lot of other farmers throughout the country. And when the date of the threatened eviction arrived, they came and they arrested all the farmers. And my mother, my 72-year-old mother, was actually held in a prison cell here in Chigutu for 2 days, for 2 nights. The police themselves were okay, they were civil, but they were just simply doing their duty. But it was just the fact that this 72-year-old lady with a heart problem had to sleep on this hard floor with one blanket. It was winter time. My mother was bald due to stress because my father was actually dying. That was the worst thing about it, was that I had to tell my father, whom died 2 weeks later, that my mother had been imprisoned. And we phoned and we pleaded with the police not to do this because of my mother's state of health, because of her age and the fact that my father needed her. But yeah, my dad did. He died 2 weeks later, and it was very, very, very traumatic. Another one of the traumas that we went through was my grandfather's grave, the desecration of my grandfather's grave. There's a picture. It was desecrated 3 times. I've written in my diary about that too, about how my brother was out from New Zealand and we actually wept by the graveside. It was my grandfather's skull. My grandfather died before we were born, but we actually saw they'd moved the shoulders and the skull. There was a huge big hole that somehow, I don't know, was crushed on the side, and there was it was like a nightmare. So, you long for that acknowledgement that actually we have been done a great wrong, that everything's been taken and we're struggling to survive out there. We cannot farm, we cannot grow anything, we cannot have our cattle. We were forced to sell our cattle because we were constantly being we were constantly in trouble because our cattle would go onto the settlers' plots, and we tried to confine them into a tiny paddock, but they would inevitably break out, or somebody would leave a gate open and our cattle ended up trampling their crop.
How come you stayed?
Because that's my home. Yeah. Because I love the place. That's what hurts the most, is that it's just like we can be rubbed out. Our identity is just totally obliterated, and that, to me, that shouldn't happen in this world. It shouldn't happen. That's where my roots are. That, our family's been in Africa. It's not just the time that we spent in Zimbabwe, what used to be Rhodesia, but it goes back to the 1600s, 1666, when our first ancestors arrived in South Africa, the German Dutch East India Company. And I can't understand. It's just, I can. It's home. I'm African. I am African. My roots are here. My roots are on the farm, which is slowly being destroyed. I have cried. And I struggled. Initially, I fought it. The destruction, I fought it. You can see all the photos. I really fought. And I was actually, what's the word? I was despised because of that. The settler community hated me because I was considered antagonistic, and I was just, I don't know. And I actually gave up. As I said to you, I actually developed, we all developed, I think all of us have developed emotional problems, and became very anorexic.